Every problem you see, every injustice, everything that's going on in the world right now that looks terrible, that looks bad, that looks like it could be possibly evil, comes down to a failure of leadership. Everything in your life right now that you don't love, everything that's causing you pain, everything that's causing you strife, anything that right now for you that is not working comes down to personal leadership. But not just leadership in general. Specifically, it comes down to a lack of ownership, a lack of taking responsibility, especially for those things that are in the direct center of our control. So what's the antidote? What's the cure? The cure is this. As a collective, as a society, we have to start not just taking ownership and demanding it of others, but actually seeing that it is our responsibility. It's actually the center of gravity of our personal power. This isn't about beating yourself up. This isn't about taking blame and shame for everything. It's about being able to look yourself in the mirror, setting the ego aside, setting the identity and the insecurities aside, and accepting the fact that you have the power and the capacity to receive and take that ownership, full ownership and full responsibility for the things in your life that need to change. If we did that as a collective, the world would be a much better place. Not only do we have to hold our leaders and other people responsible, but it starts with holding ourselves responsible and taking that ownership right here, right now. What's up, my friends? JT DeBolt with you today for the True Driven Podcast, the podcast for the few, the true, the driven, those of us who have aligned and united to become the true driven. And I say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever time it is for you, no matter where you might be tuning in from on the Big Blue Marble. Thank you as always for joining me here on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, YouTube, youtube.com/JT DeBolt. That is your resource. That is your home for all things True Driven, not just the True Driven podcast, but of course, the other content that I bring to you on a regular basis. I encourage you, if you have not yet done so already, to get over there, hit that subscribe button so that you can stay in the know and be the first to know when I bring new stuff to you on a consistent basis. And for you True Drivens out there, big shout out. We are in some really interesting times. As always, it feels like I open up every single podcast with that because it's true, it's timely, and we have evidential proof on a consistent basis of how important our role is in society. Our role, I'm talking about as True Drivens, those of us who have aligned and united and decided that we will work on personal excellence for ourselves to set that demonstrate that example for others. And what could possibly be more important now than that? Now more than ever. Now, I talk a lot about personal leadership. And the reason I love personal leadership as opposed to, say, organizational leadership is that while it's important for an organization to focus on what they can do to create a great culture, to elevate the performance of the organization, it truly begins with and comes down to the deciding factor is the individual. We can talk about collective leadership. We can talk about collective excellence. But in order to affect that, to actualize it, it comes down to personal leadership, personal excellence. One of the foundational principles, as I see it, of personal leadership, personal excellence, is not just the ability to take ownership, but the desire to do so, the compulsion to do so, the identification that that is a responsibility that we all have, individually and collectively. That is to take personal responsibility, to take ownership. Now, you may have heard of the great Jocko Willink and heard of many of the books that he wrote with his co-author, Leif Babin. The two of them served in the SEAL teams, obviously in the battles of Ramadi and things like this. If you're familiar with him through the Jocko podcast, you probably know what I'm referring to. They have a book and a series of books on extreme ownership in their program, Echelon Front Leadership Training and Development Program. They talk a lot about this concept of extreme ownership. I want to kind of address that for a second and talk a little bit about what it is and what it might not be, or the misperception that I think a lot of people think that it could be. I have made posts about this before on my social media platforms. I've talked about the importance of receiving that responsibility, taking on that ownership and that responsibility, and being able to say, hey, everything inside my life right now, I take ownership and responsibility for. But what's interesting about that is in the act of saying that, it never ceases to amaze me how I will get negative feedback from people almost in a defensive manner, in a way of justifying how not taking ownership is the answer, is the way it should be. I made a post one time about taking ownership, and I said, even if, for instance, you get hit by a car, let's say you're driving and you get T-boned in the intersection, there's an element of that car accident, even though you were totally not the person that was at fault. Maybe somebody hit you, they ran a red light, for instance. There is an element of that is your responsibility. You can think to yourself, well, had I left a little bit earlier or left later, taken a different route, for instance, maybe instead of speeding, I slowed down and missed that stoplight, and I would have bypassed the, getting hit by the person coming through the intersection. I use that as an example. It was kind of like a metaphor. And I got absolutely filleted, or at least attempted to be, in the comments section. How could you be so crass? How could you be so cold? When I was young, I was hit by a drunk driver. Are you saying it was my fault? And no one is talking about fault, but that's the interesting part about it. The default behavior of so many people right now in society is to shed blame. Meaning we won't take responsibility for our actions. We won't take responsibilities for our mistakes. We won't take responsibilities for our failures. Instead, we want to quickly and easily find something or someone to put that blame on. Part of it, I think I can kind of understand, because if you look around and you start to see, especially examples of, quote, leadership, you'll start to see how fast those people will not accept responsibility. In fact, they'll point fingers and push the blame out away from themselves. Right now, all you have to do, don't do this, but if you wanted to, you could flip on the television and see coverage of the Los Angeles wildfires. Regardless of how it was started, what we can see is how it got so bad and so out of hand. It was a lack of preparation. The infrastructure wasn't set for it. The resources were not available. In fact, the response to it was delayed. And what that boils down to is piss poor leadership. And instead of accepting that leadership and accepting the responsibility for that, the fucking governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles went on a tirade talking about all the things that went wrong that were outside of their control. They weren't taking responsibility. Not one time did they come out and say, hey, listen, this is on me. As the supreme executive position in this state under a state of emergency, not once did they accept responsibility for it. Instead, we get this pantomiming and this weird behavior and the double talk. I'm not here to just attack a politician because, let's face it, that's easy. That's punching down. What I do want to address is how important it is for us to stop this behavior. And I realize that it is sort of the trend. It's sort of the thing that people do, especially on social media. It's so easy to attack, to point fingers, to push blame, because it's social media after all. There's no recourse. You can call somebody a name, you can point fingers, you can even behave in a way that's completely outrageous, and not one consequence will come to you. No, you might get some feedback or some blowback. Oh, heaven forbid somebody's harsh words come at you. But the idea of getting punched in the face for being an asshole to somebody, that's not going to happen on social media. So all of a sudden you start getting people with this false sense of pride, this false sense of power, this false sense of toughness, talking shit with no consequence. They would never say half the things that they would say to you if they were one-to-one in person with you. They lack that courage. It's crazy how much social media amplifies cowardice. But that's not actually the topic for today. The topic for today, and the thing that I think is most important because it's so timely and it continues to be an issue for us as a society, is we need strong leadership. We need people who are willing to accept responsibility and demonstrate the power of taking ownership. So let's talk about what this looks like. I am not saying that you have to accept blame for literally everything, but all of the leaders here, if you're a leader, if you identify as a leader, which I have to assume you do if you're here on this podcast, you know that if your life right now isn't where you want it to be, that is on you. Every problem you have, every failure you have, every continued repeat mistake that you make is a leadership failure. It's a leadership discrepancy. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you are not capable of leadership. It means that it's a window into what possibly there may be many things that need to be corrected, but at least it's a window into a potential blind spot, something to look at. Now, when I say potential, what I'm saying is I don't mean this to make this out to be an absolute. There might be things that, hey, they just happen. It's a one-off thing. Does that mean you need to stop everything and overthink and overanalyze and get crazy about things? No. What it means is if you have something that happens on a continual basis, you probably want to look at that and see it for what it is, and that is a leadership failure, a leadership issue, a leadership discrepancy or deficiency, an opportunity, if you choose to see it that way, for growth. Because the reality is that leaders see every, quote, problem as an opportunity, as a challenge. They rise up to it. You true drivens know that that's the spirit. That's what we live by. So telling you this is kind of like singing to the choir. The idea that we have a challenge, we see that as an opportunity, not a problem. We don't see this as, oh my gosh, it's an attack. Oh my gosh, it's an insult. Oh my gosh, I'm offended. Fuck that shit. No, we look at that as an opportunity to make direct eye contact with excellence. Let me rise to the occasion. Let me demonstrate my strength. Let me demonstrate my wisdom. Let me demonstrate my experience in dealing with adversity. That's taking ownership. When things don't work out the way we had intended or promised or discussed or hoped, instead of making an excuse, taking on the role of victim, we accept ownership. We put that, heavy as the crown might be, that crown on our head and realize that we alone are the leader. We are responsible to accomplish the fucking mission. And so in so doing, there is no room for the minor excuses. There is no room for the big excuses. Even if the excuse has merit, we want to be able to say, listen, yes, there were causal factors and address those. To do so, or to ignore that, is to basically allow the opportunity for that outside circumstance to show up again. It's like leaving the gate open and the wolves of evil are going to come in and devour your flock. So yes, you do want to address if there are outside circumstances that led to the failure, that led to the thing. In the case of, let's say, these wildfires, of course there are environmental things at play. Of course, the high winds, for instance, and the dry temperatures and so on and so forth, the lack of humidity. Yes, there are causal factors that will reinforce these fires. But at the end of the day, we have to look at what actually started this and what caused them to be so inflamed, literally, so fast. And there are certain things that were leadership driven, leadership responsibilities that were completely ignored. Not only that, is that in the face of this tragedy, instead of the strong voice of leadership, the voice of strength itself, we get the weakness, the victimhood of excuses. Now listen, that's just an example for us to learn from. I am really not here to dwell on the ineffectiveness of the lack of leadership in that state and the way it's run. What I do want to do is talk about you. I want to talk about how you can create a better life, a better business, better results through the art and the power and the strength and the skill of taking ownership. The first part of this is to be able to slow down and actually look at the situation. So if right now you've got something in your life that is not working for you, Maybe it's a financial situation. Maybe it's a health issue. Maybe it's a relationship that has failed or somehow taken a downturn. It could be anything. I want you to look at those areas of your life that cause you the most pain. Maybe you have regrets around that. Maybe you have guilt. Maybe you have some of the more ineffective emotions like regret, guilt, etc., that take away your personal power and your ability to lead, and address those areas. What is that area for you? This is a journaling exercise, by the way. I really encourage you to slow down and think about this, to actually put pen to paper and consider what these things are, these areas of your life, and the pain that they are causing yourself and potentially likely other people. That's the first part of ownership. When we ignore things and aren't willing to look at those blind spots and those dark areas of our lives, that's the first step in not taking ownership, is to ignore it. It takes courage, and it takes strength, and it takes the ability to connect to a vision in order to say, hey, this isn't working for me. This requires my direct, immediate, and complete attention. That is leadership. Now, we look at that area and we have to be really honest with ourselves about the degree and the weight and the gravity of which that deficiency or that pain is showing up in our lives. So if it's a financial thing or a health thing or a relationship thing, you can't just look at it and go, it's not that bad. I mean, it could be worse. I'll worry about it later. Because what's happening? We are literally deferring ownership. We're not taking full responsibility. So if we're going to turn a blind eye to it or somehow diminish the pain, diminish the consequence, diminish the things that are actually causing bigger problems in our lives, there is very little hope for a correction of course. That's something that as society, we have just sort of accepted from our leaders, from the people that we appoint to positions of power. Hey, it's okay to fuck up and make excuses for it. It's okay to blame somebody else, not yourself, for that problem. The previous administration, the next administration, and so on. We start pointing fingers at the economy and the weather and the climate and all these things, as opposed to taking personal responsibility for what we can do to correct our health, to correct our finances, to correct our lives, our businesses, our relationships. This idea of constantly pushing blame out, pointing fingers at other people, is complete victim mentality. It's got to fucking stop. Think of it this way. I've done many episodes on excuses and how to stop making excuses. You can find those anywhere. Here's a great episode right here. But what I want you to realize is this. Every time you make an excuse, you play the victim. You basically say, I'm not strong enough to accept responsibility. Therefore, I'm going to point my finger at something external to myself. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a situation, maybe it's something, and say that that's the reason for the change in my life. That's the reason for the decrease in my performance. That's the reason for me not showing up and doing what I said I was going to do. Either promising someone else or promising yourself. That is weakness. That is the opposite, the antithesis of leadership. If, on the other hand, you can look at the areas where you can accept full responsibility and have that strength of character, have the courage to be able to look it in the eye and say, yes, I do own that. Now you actually have the building blocks, the foundation, the solid ground upon which to build a strong leadership foundation. There's a great video, speaking of these wildfires in LA, of a couple who has lost their entire home. The only thing left standing was their outside kitchen. It's like got kind of like a barbecue, a refrigerator, and all these things. And the couple are out there joyfully enjoying a beer, because that's all that survived was their refrigerator, the grill, and the outside kind of kitchen. Everything else is destroyed. And not matter-of-factly and not dismissively, they're like, well, hey, listen, at least we're still alive. We've got our dog. We've got each other. Cheers. It was amazing. And what that demonstrated was not just the strength of the human spirit, Not just the strength of those two people and their character. That's evident. But what it demonstrated was actually taking ownership and saying, hey, it's all we have left is this moment. Instead of sitting here in misery, feeling sorry for ourselves, wallowing in and marinating in our own self-pity, they smiled. They showed gratitude for what they actually had left. The most important things, their life and each other. Everything else, all the stuff can be rebuilt and replaced. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, my friend, is the ability to, even in the face of adversity, even in the face of great loss, instead of playing the victim, yes, you can mourn 100%. You can feel the sadness of loss and all these things. I'm not saying be Pollyanna and ignore those things. That's actually the opposite of taking ownership. But the minute we subscribe to this idea of pity, when we make excuses, we're seeking pity from others. We're wrapping ourselves in the blanket of self-pity for ourselves when we make excuses and we live in our excuses. It's one thing to say, hey, this is what happened. Didn't see it coming. But then we could say, perhaps I could have seen it coming. How might I make sure I see it coming next time so it doesn't happen a second time? Instead of identifying as a victim, like, well, this happened to me. Saying, I'm not a victim. This shouldn't have happened to me. It won't happen again. I can fucking guarantee you that, motherfucker. If you take that attitude on, then guess what? You have risen above the circumstance. You have risen above what happened. You have begun to take ownership because you see the truth for what it is and that you are not a loser. You are not a victim. Instead, you're a winner. As a true driven, you are driven to get yourself out of the circumstance, not sit and wallow in the pity. So many people love the pity. So many people love to stay stuck in the thing. The reason is because they receive something from it. Sometimes it's attention. Sometimes it's love and acknowledgement. Things that in their lives they have missed forever. You've probably heard me talk about this. This was one of the biggest issues I had in 2020 and 2021 when the pandemic came out. Everybody, of course, wanted to talk about, we're living in a pandemic because they love to feel significant for the first time in their lives. Oh my gosh, it's so awesome. I'm such a survivor. No, you're not. You are actually being tricked into this thing. Now, let's talk about how that thing has propagated through social media and mainstream media and legacy media. Now, all of a sudden, things like mediocrity get rewarded. People who are overweight, unhealthy, are seen as heroes. People who are victims and who are actually looking to tear down our country are looked at as patriots. And then people who are genuinely patriots, genuinely strong, genuinely healthy, are seen as toxic. Are we fucking crazy? We've literally flipped the meaning of these things, not for the better of society, but rather to drive a hidden agenda, whatever that might be. Who knows? I don't, but I can only assume it ain't good. So what's the answer? The answer is this. Individually, you and I, as true drivens, make that commitment to personal excellence, physical strength, mental strength, emotional strength, spiritual strength. We work on ourselves first. We build our businesses. We share our messages courageously. We get clear on our values, those things that guide us like our true North Star. We define and create and start to build toward and live a vision for ourselves, a vision that impacts the world around us and the people we care about. We get clear on and commit to a mission that helps us recognize and realize and actualize that vision, but also one that serves others. And we show up each day with a sense of purpose, that sense of purpose that keeps us out of that self-pity, that keeps us out of victimhood, that keeps us out of the depression and the sadness and all of the negativity that we see amplified and even celebrated in the world as being somehow virtuous. Those things aren't virtuous. What's virtuous is being strong enough to accept full responsibility for your life, full responsibility for what you have done and what you have failed to do, full responsibility for your strengths, your weaknesses, your beauty, and your warts. to be able to say, those are mine. And here's what I'm going to do with them. Here's what I'm going to do about them. That takes courage. This idea of pushing away responsibility, blaming other people because it's easy and also because it's in vogue. We got to course correct that, you and me, as true drivens, and demonstrate that, live that example on a fucking daily basis. Otherwise, we are lost as a society. And I'm not saying this to be preachy. I'm not trying to say this as doom and gloom, nor am I saying this from a place of, trying to come from fire and brimstone and all the negativity that you already get enough of and probably, quite frankly, are puking all over outside to get outside of your system. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make a point that you and I have a responsibility to take ownership, to take responsibility, to even see that the course that we are going as a society is part of our problem. Not our fault, but our problem. We have to own and accept our role in that. So what can we do? Number one, we can have these tough conversations like this. Number two, we can say, hey, you know what? That doesn't work for me, and I'm not going to allow it to continue. Step three is to be able to say, here's what I can do about it. I can get strong. I can get healthy. I can share my word. I can help other people, lift up other people. I can choose not to participate and opt out from all this bullshit drama and all the other stuff that's going on, all the negativity and the vitriol and all of the things that seem to be part of the algorithm, that seem to be part of the agenda or whatever it is you believe in. We can make the choice every fucking day. Actually, not a choice, a decision. We can decide that we are not going to participate in that we are going to opt out of it, and that we are actually going to receive and take on that responsibility and take full ownership for what we can control. In doing that, guess what? It may seem small. You may say, hey, there's just too much at play. Well, be careful when you say that. If you subscribe to that and submit to it, you're actually deferring ownership. You're deferring responsibility. The point here is that in any given moment of our lives, in our daily lives, we have to be willing to say that we are stronger than our circumstances, that we have more character than the chaos around us, that our failures, our shortcomings, all of our insecurities, it's part of the mix, and we're going to receive and accept responsibility for those. We're not going to push blame, even if there is blame to push. What the fuck is the point? We waste too much fucking time with that shit, too much energy going into that self-pity descent, which is exactly what happens when we start pushing and pointing and causing everybody else to be the aggressor. We put ourselves into a position of being a victim. Are you fucking serious? Like, let's stop and let's arrest that behavior. Nip it at the bud the minute you feel it, the minute you sense it. Is it easy? No. Is it fun? No. But it's like any muscle that you develop. You develop that strength, and as you start to feel that strength, you can start to wield that strength in an effective way that benefits you and others. Instead of being down in the gut-sick feelings of victimhood, where you feel like you got to blame other people in order to elevate your sense of power, elevate your sense of strength. Realize that's not power or strength to blame people, to point fingers and talk about how that group and that person is bad and evil. What about you? What are you doing to be better? What are you doing to be excellent? What are you doing to lead? What are you doing to set an example? Stop blaming other people. Start receiving more ownership and responsibility. And I'm not saying this to you. I'm saying as a society, this is what we have to do. And this is the kind of character, this is the kind of example you and I have to be able to set as true drivens. And so that's it. Today and every single day, look at what's going on around the world. If you don't like what you see, accept partial responsibility for that. At least as much as you know, you can say, hey, I had a part in allowing this to propagate. I had a part in this becoming actually the norm for the world that I see. If it's in your direct control, your finances, your health, your spirituality, your family, your relationships, your overall happiness, joy, and well-being, then come on. I implore you. I challenge you to take full fucking responsibility for that right now. You matter. We need you to be strong, to be happy, to be healthy, to be prosperous, to be fit, to contribute, to give back, to lead. I need you. I'm looking at you. Let's go. But we can't do that. It's not possible if we're constantly in a place of pushing away responsibility, refusing ownership, and pointing fingers and pushing out the blame. Gotta stop that. So today and every single day, I know you guys hear this and I know you receive this. This is my rally cry. This is my wake-up call. This is my reminder. Whatever you need it to be. Maybe it's just one of those things where you're like, fuck yeah, bro, I needed this today. Whatever that might be, throw it in the comments. I want to know. But most importantly, I want you to take this message, share it with other people that you think need to hear it, even if it's the world, broadly speaking, but live the example. Live the example of strength. Live the example of leadership. Live the example of ownership. We've got to do that today and every single day. That's what's most important. My friends, thank you very much for being a part of this movement. If you got some value from this, share the message far and wide. Hit that subscribe button. Stay in the know so you can be the first to know when I bring new content to you. And remember, no matter what course you fly in life, fly high, fly fast, and fly far. Stay driven.